Did you know that the first gold coins used for commerce in the United States were actually foreign coins adjusted by silversmiths to bring their weights into conformity with local regulations? To increase the weight of a coin, a hole was drilled through it and a gold plug was inserted into the hole. To decrease a coin's weight, its edges would be clipped. Typically, the silversmith would then add his hallmark to signify that the coin's weight had been properly regulated in this manner. The coin might have been from a foreign country, but the regulation made it truly American. David McCarthy, senior numismatist and researcher at Kagan's, has a unique eye for unusual coins and the fascinating history that often surrounds them, and he demonstrates that again in this video. Here, David tells the story of regulated gold, which he counts as his favorite area in all of American numismatics. And he displays some really intriguing examples, including 2 coins regulated by Ephraim Brazier, the New York silversmith who created the famous Brazier doubloon. When you're at the next Long Beach show in June, be sure to stop by the Kagan's booth and see David. You never know what extraordinary coins he will be featuring. Maybe he'll even have some regulated gold.
Hi, I'm David McCarthy from Kagan's, and I'm here at the Long Beach Coin and Collectible Expo with the people from PCGS. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about probably my very favorite numismatic item in the world, something called regulated gold. Regulated gold coins are gold coins that were struck in countries other than the United States that were altered by silversmiths in North America just prior to, during, and shortly after the Revolutionary War to bring them to local weight standards. And these were really the first gold coins of the United States. Most people haven't heard of regulated coins, and I was actually one of those people who wasn't familiar with them up until probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And when I first worked for Kagan's, I had a client of the company who came in, and he had collected West Indian cut and countermarked coins back in the 1950s as a boy. And he had a large group of them, and in this group was a gold coin that had been cut down and plugged and stamped with a very ornate letter B. And he said that he thought that it was a piece from the United States, but he didn't know. And I looked at it, and I didn't really know what it was. And I did a little bit of research and came to find out that it was a gold piece that had been used in New York City shortly after the Revolutionary War, and that a man named John Berger, who was a silversmith there, had regulated it or had altered its weight so that it functioned with local weight standards. And I talked to a lot of dealers, and there were only 1 or 2 people who really understood what these things were. And I thought to myself, well, you know, this is a really incredibly cool piece of numismatic Americana. Basically, in a nutshell, the story of regulated gold is very similar to the story of pioneer gold coins in the United States. It's a story of a lack of an adequate means of exchange and private individuals taking it upon themselves to create money that will allow them to engage in day-to-day business. And so what happened is in the 18th century, merchants in the United States used a variety of different types of money, but among these types of money were foreign gold coins. And these gold coins were struck to a variety of different weight standards and came in several different finenesses. And so if you were a merchant in New York City, say in 1770, and you had to take payment for a large shipment of goods, you would get this mixture of gold coins. And in order to figure out what they were worth, these merchants got together and would issue charts that listed the different types of coins then in circulation, what they ought to weigh, and their weights weren't based upon the weights that the coins were issued at. The weights were based upon usually a slightly lower weight, because the coins that they encountered were often clipped. And then they would also list what the coins should be worth in the local the local money that they were using at the time, maybe British pounds sterling, and quite often they were also listed in Spanish silver dollars, which was the preferred medium of exchange during the colonial and the post-colonial period. And so what ended up happening is, they had these charts that people were using to try to figure out what their gold was worth. And silversmiths would take those charts and for some sort of a fee would take your gold coin, say your Portuguese 6400 reis, which was one of the most commonly encountered gold coins at the time, and they would weigh it and determine if it was overweight or underweight. And if it was overweight, they'd clip a little bit off of it. And if it was underweight, they would actually insert a gold plug in it. And when they were done with the weight adjustment, they would mark their initials on the coin with a stamp to show that the coin was to the correct standard for the time. And these coins are what we now call regulated gold coins. And there are three basic periods that they were made during. Prior to the Revolutionary War, there was at least one, maybe several weight standards that were in effect. And then during the Revolutionary War, there were two weight standards that are commonly encountered. You have the British-occupied New York standard, and then you also have the standard of Continental Congress, which is much, much rarer. And then following the Revolutionary War, you have the most commonly encountered material is cut to the standard of the Bank of New York. We've got four pieces here today, and there are examples of pre-revolutionary revolutionary New York City occupied by British material, and then post-revolutionary Bank of New York material. So the first of these is a piece that was regulated by a silversmith named Thomas Pons, and this piece was regulated to a weight of 9 pennyweights, 4 grains, and would have circulated at a value of 3 pounds, 1 shilling Philadelphia currency. This is a very rare piece. There are a handful of Thomas Pons pieces, but the vast majority of them have been clipped down to below the weight standard that they were originally issued at. And so a full weight Thomas Pons piece is, maybe 3 or 4 of them exist, maybe. So this is a pre-revolutionary piece that we've got here. And then the second piece we have is perhaps the most interesting. It's a piece that was regulated prior to the Revolutionary War by a silversmith by the name of Louis Feuder in New York City. And then during the Revolutionary War, Feuder actually stayed in New York City and developed a partnership called F&G. The G of the Feuder and G in this partnership is a mystery. We're still trying to figure out who it might have been, but Feuder was a loyalist. He stayed in New York City, and after the British took New York in 1776, General Howe issued a proclamation that regulated the weights of gold coins, and this coin was regulated to the post-proclamation weight of 9 pennyweights, 3 grains. And the interesting thing about this piece is there's a plug in it from when Louis Feuder originally regulated it to the 9 pennyweight, 4 grain standard, and then at some point it was clipped down, and F&G, Feuder and his partner, then re-regulated it to bring it to 9 pennyweights, 3 grains. So it sort of shows two separate eras and one person operating in both eras. It's also got probably the most dramatic plug I've ever seen in one of these. Then the third item is a post-revolutionary piece that was regulated in New York City that's marked by both John Berger and Ephraim Brazier, the man who made the Brazier doubloon. And this piece is a 9 pennyweight piece, which was valued at $8 silver in New York after the Revolution. And it's unusual to see a piece that's marked by both Brazier and Berger because they were both operating at about the same time. What this probably indicates is that the piece was re-regulated after being clipped. That would be my guess. It's a very, very interesting piece. Now, Brazier is probably the most commonly encountered mark on any of these pieces. And it's interesting to note that the Brazier doubloon actually corresponds to a weight standard that was in use in New York City for regulated gold coins, and it would seem that the brazier doubloon is actually an outgrowth of the practice of regulating gold coins. And then the final piece that I've brought here today is probably my favorite regulated piece, at least of all of the pieces that I've handled in the recent past, and this is an Ephraim Brazier gold dollar. There are only two of these known. This is actually struck on a 1749 Portuguese 800 raise, and that's kind of ironic, a 1749 gold coin being one of the first U.S. gold dollars, being that we started actually striking them in 1849. But this piece was regulated by Brazier, and it is the only denomination of regulated gold coin that actually corresponds to a U.S. denomination that was actually struck by the U.S. Mint. There are $8 gold pieces and $15 gold pieces and 3 2/3 dollars and 4 2/3 dollars pieces, but this is the only one that actually corresponds to a U.S. denomination. This is a $1 gold coin that was probably in use in New York City sometime between 1783 and 1795, and as such is sort of an incredibly important piece in terms of all of this regulated gold. Regulated gold coins generally have a value for wholesome pieces that weigh the correct amount of somewhere between maybe $15,000 or $17,000 on the low end, on up to over $100,000 for the best possible pieces. Their values are based upon the overall aesthetic appeal of the piece, although grading isn't necessarily as important with these. A piece that has a big dramatic plug like this Louis Feuder piece is a little more desirable for the guys who collect these. Surface quality is important, but the other thing that really drives the value of these is the rarity of the silversmith who struck it, or the importance of the silversmith who struck it. For instance, brazier pieces, although they're the most common, quite often command a big premium because it's probably the only way the average, I wouldn't even say the average collector, but a well-heeled collector can't hope to own one of the brazier doubloons, but you can actually own a brazier gold coin this way for under 6 figures. The other significant silversmith that I can think of whose pieces there's only one known, has commanded a tremendous premium is Meyer Myers, who was operating in New York City and was probably the most prominent Jewish goldsmith in New York during the 18th century. One of his pieces recently auctioned for nearly $100,000 and would have gone for quite a bit more, but it was considerably underweight and a little bit cleaned. So that gives you a little bit of an idea about regulated gold coins. I would definitely suggest to anyone who's interested in them, try to only buy pieces that have been encapsulated by PCGS or another competent grading service, because getting the weight right on these pieces and making sure that they're really nice and problem-free is really quite important in terms of valuing them. And I would love to be able to recommend a book or some publications, but unfortunately, apart from a couple of auction catalogs and an article that I wrote for the PCGS Market Report several years ago, there really hasn't been very much published on these, and hopefully in the next couple of years we'll be able to fix that, and perhaps someone will come out with a book that explains the incredible story of these coins a little bit more in a little bit more in-depth manner. Because again, for my money, there really isn't a piece of U.S. numismatics that's quite as interesting as these, and it's certainly an area where there is a tremendous amount left for us to learn. Thanks very much.